Like Julie said, I'm going to be talking about a playbook for achieving product market fit. My book is pretty long. It's 335 pages, so I don't have time to cover all of it, but I'm going to cover some of the key ideas that hopefully you guys can apply tomorrow when you get back to your office. All right, so the framework that I created is called the product market fit pyramid. And as a model for how to think about product market fit, it has 5 layers. The bottom 2 layers are where the market lives, right? And this is a hierarchical model where each layer builds on the other layer. So it all starts with the target customer. Who are we trying to create value for? Whose life are we trying to make better? It starts there. And the next level up is what are their underserved needs that correspond to that target customer. We want to be focusing on customer needs, and we'll talk specifically about what is underserved need in a minute. But that's a market. If you read any economics book or marketing book, they'll basically say, hey, a market is a set of people that share a set of common needs. That's a market. Your product, I like to describe as 3 main hypotheses that you need to get right. The bottom, the first one is value proposition, and that should be building on the underserved needs if everything's going right. Your value proposition is which needs are we going to deliver for the client, and how are we going to do so in a way that's better than the substitutes and the other competition that's out there. Your feature set, that's where the functionality comes in. The functionality is what actually conveys the benefits to the end user. And your user experience, your UX, is what actually they interact with to take advantage of the functionality to get the benefits, right? So that's basically product market fit. Now when you have this, basically this is the market that's product. Product market fit is just how well are all the assumptions and decision and execution you're doing in the top 3 product layers, how well do they resonate with the realities of the marketplace? That's product market fit. Now when I had this model, this is basically a way to capture the key hypotheses that need to, as I said, need to be true to achieve product market fit. I realized I can turn this into a process that we can go through. And I call it the lean product process. It uses the pyramid. You just work your way through and get clear on what are my hypotheses about my target customer, what are my hypotheses about what their needs are, what's my plan for how we're going to meet those needs in a way that's better or different. What should my MVP feature set? This is where the MVP comes in, right? We don't want to overbuild. We don't want to bite off more scope before we realize we're going in the wrong direction. So that's where MVP comes in. What's that feature set going to be? And then we need to do UX design. We need to do it for a couple reasons. One, we need to do it to build our product, right? We need to work through what's the design going to be. But the other big thing is when you actually end up with some UX artifacts or a prototype, you can go out and test with customers. And I'm a big proponent of testing with clickable prototypes, tappable prototypes before you build. And so once you do that, there's a 6th step now, which is you've worked your way through all these assumptions. You have a UX prototype. You go and you test it with customers. If you have a live product, you can test that too. And that's where you assess your level of product market fit, right? So that's the 6 steps of the process. I don't have time to go through the whole thing. I'm going to focus on the first 3 steps, which are the most important kind of the steps that in my book are kind of has the most unique content around that. There are plenty of other books on talking about how to do UX design and run user research. So let's jump in basically. It starts with determining your target customer. And by the way, I should say you can apply this process if you're building a new product. If you're building a new feature, you can use it for a new feature. If you're building a V2 of something, you can use it. And you can even use it if you have a product where you haven't applied these techniques, you can apply it there. So it applies at various levels. Let's say you are doing a V1 product, a new product. It starts with who's your target customer. And I just want to acknowledge that if you've got a blank sheet of paper and you know nothing like Jon Snow right now and you're trying to figure out who your target customer is, it may be daunting. So I just want to acknowledge that. It's okay to put some high-level placeholder tentative hypothesis here and come back and revise it as you learn. The first 2 steps are so intertwined that we're going to be doing that. But let me show you why it's so important. And actually, before I do, I want to share an example. I was talking to some entrepreneurs, and I was just going through my questionnaire of the product market fit pyramid. I said, hey, who's your target customer? And they looked at me and they said, it's millennials. And at first I was like, that's cool. That's a good answer, specific answer. They have an answer. That's great. Not I don't know or women, right? But then I thought about it. I'm like, how many millennials are there out there? They're not all the same, right? There's something different. And their product was in a certain context, like related to food. So I'm sure they could have come up with more detailed stuff. That's what happens all the time, whether it's us talking about target customers or us talking about customer needs. It's easy to just have a pat answer at the superficial layer and not get deeper. Let me explain why the second you apply a lens of a specific target customer, it forces you to peel the onion. So let's talk about a need that a lot of people have. Transportation, say 100 miles, within 100 miles of your home. Like we all have this need to get to work, to get to school, to get to the store, whatever it is, right? And so we could all say at one level we all have the same need. But let's talk about how the second we start talking about specific customer types, let's say a soccer mom, one target segment, versus a speed demon, another target segment, they both have that same need. But if we did customer discovery interviews and we talked to 20 soccer moms and said, hey, can you tell us about what's important to you when it comes to transportation? We might hear things like, well, you know, I've got to carry my kids and all their friends and all their gear around, so the car's got to be big enough to carry that. You know, I'm driving my kids around, there's nothing more precious, it's got to be really safe. I'm doing a lot of driving, so fuel economy is really important to me, so I don't spend too much money on gas, right? If we talk to 20 speed demons, we wouldn't hear any of that. We might hear things like, well, it's really important to me that the car goes fast and that it looks cool and then it makes me look cool when I'm driving it. That's what really matters to me, right? And you end up with very different products. And the reason I use cars a lot is just think about all the different shapes and sizes of cars that are out there on the street, right? They've done a really good job of micro-segmentation and matching the product with the market, right? But again, they share the high-level needs. So what you want to do is peel those onions, and you're not going to know this right out the gate. Until you get out there and start talking to people, you're not going to have those nuances. But that's why it's so important. Now, the second step, once we're clear on who our target customer is, hypotheses are, is to identify their underserved needs, basically. And the concept that I advocate here to help understand this is problem space versus solution space. Has anybody here heard of this before? So some people have. So I've been talking about this for a while. I'm excited to see more and more people talking about problem space. Let me explain what it is real quick. So problem space is a customer problem, a customer need, or a benefit, a job to be done, a well-written, you know, story, user story, whatever you want to call it, a product requirement. If it's well written, that's what it is. If I said, "Hey Barry, let's create a way that makes it easy for people to share photos with their friends," that statement would be in the problem space. In contrast, solution space is a specific implementation to address that need. Right? So if we suddenly said, hey, and by the way, I just coded that app over the weekend, let me show it to you, that app would be in the solution space. If Barry came to me and said, hey, I have a set of mock-ups that I think would look really good for this app, those mock-ups would be in the solution space. So that's the difference between kind of a more abstract customer need in the problem space and a specific solution in the solution space. So the example I'd like to use to illustrate this is when NASA was sending astronauts into space, they knew that the ballpoint pens that we use wouldn't work because they rely on gravity. And it wasn't NASA. If you go Google this right now, you end up at a Snopes.com article. It says this is all urban legend. It wasn't NASA. That's the key point of contention. But one of their subcontractors, Fisher, the head of the Fisher company, said, you know what? I think we can invent a pen that writes in space. And he went out and he spent $1 million in R&D, and he invented a space pen. So I actually have one. I haven't confirmed this works in space myself. If anybody works at NASA and wants to take me along, I'll go for it. Faced with the same challenge, the Russians gave their astronauts pencils. And you can actually get a Russian space pen. It's a red pencil in a box. It's a cheeky joke poking fun at NASA, right? So why do I share this example? A few reasons. One, obviously if these are both equally good solutions to the need, then the one that didn't take $1 million and all that time and effort would be higher ROI and better, right? The second reason, and I forgot to mention this earlier, so many teams, their natural bias is just to jump into solution space. Especially, you know, not to pick on Silicon Valley, but around here you have startups like, we code because we can, you know. we code. It's like, we just built it. Did you talk to any users? No, we just built it. It was great, you know. It's so easy. It's so easy to do. Just, you know, that's the temptation, right? But what happens, and even when you're trying to stick in the problem space, sometimes you get some pollution in there. You get some solution space pollution in your problem space, like peanut butter in your chocolate, right? So what was it when the guy said, "Hey, I think I can create a pen that writes in space"? What was that solution space pollution he got in his requirement? Pen, right? A pen is a solution. It would have been better if he just said, like, I'm going to create a way to write in space. Just be vague like that. That would have been better than a pen that writes in space. And Barry mentioned the 5 whys technique. We could use 5 whys and say, well, why do you need a pen? Why do you guys tell me, why do astronauts need a way to write in space? Why does anybody need a way to write?
Communicate.
Yeah. What else? Communicate. Take notes. Refer to them later, maybe. If we interviewed some astronauts, that's what they'd say, right? So that might be in a better way to say it. You're getting further away from the solution and saying, well, we need a way to take notes and refer to them later. Now maybe we can do some crazy Siri thing. We talk to it, and it talks back to you and says, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. You know, that kind of a thing. So anyway, that's why I like to use this example, basically, to highlight that. Let's talk about a software example, because I used to work at Intuit. Again, we'll have problem space on the left, solution space on the right. I used to work at Intuit on Quicken. One of our other big products is TurboTax. It's a software product, so it's in the solution space. Does anyone here use TurboTax? Right, the government makes you file your taxes every year, so you have to. It's a great market to be in. Basically, it competes with another software package called TaxCut. It's also in the solution space. And what you want to do is map back and forth. You map back to make sure your solutions are solving problems, right? And what happens is there's a lot of different benefits, but if you had to pick one umbrella benefit, one umbrella, for those of you who use TurboTax at the highest level, why do you use it? What does it do for you? What value does it create? What would you say?
Don't need to read the regulations.
Don't need to read the regulations.
All the
File the taxes. What's that? User-friendly, okay. Simple. You can use more than one or two words, guys. It's okay. What else? Saves time. What's that? Pulls in all your W-2s. Excellent. So what you just experienced is a problem space. It's messy. This is the problem. This is the thing with the messy, right? People are not computers. They're not going to give you the same ASCII string answer. And you go, oh, wow, look, everybody, 8 out of 10 people gave me this wonderfully. It's messy. People use different words. Some people, like this wonderful gentleman in the back, are very specific. It sucks in my W-2. Usually the example I use is I love how it does Schedule D, but that's great. W-2 is good. Someone else is like, hey, it just saves me time. Someone else may be like, hey, it just makes my life easy. These are all different levels of specificity, right? If I had to pick some umbrella, it'd be something like, hell, it helps me prepare my taxes or helps me do my taxes. That would be a vague, millennial, transportation within 100 miles answer at the top, right? And the other person that helped me appreciate this, the difference between problem space and solution space, is Scott Cook. Scott Cook was the founder of Intuit. And responsible for a lot of their success, obviously, especially in the early days. And what he used to love to do is when he would give a talk, some training talk to a group of product managers, he'd say, hey, who's the biggest competitor of TurboTax? And everyone would eagerly raise their hand, and he'd pick somebody, and they'd be like, tax cut. And he'd be like, no, you're wrong, it's pen and paper. Because more Americans were doing their taxes with, he loved to trick people, pen and paper. Because nowadays, I don't even know what the market share of those are these days. I'm guessing electronic is more. But back then, pen and paper was the dominant way. That's the other thing about getting clear on the problem space. Right? The solutions may come and go, the technologies may come and go, but the fundamental need to do your taxes don't. Right? And at the bottom level of that market, people's needs don't change as much, anywhere near as much as solutions. In the book, I talk about the need to listen to music on the go. Started out with portable transistor radios, and then we went to Walkman, and then we went to MP3 players. So anyway, that's an example. Now, what you want to do with your team is for whatever domain you're working in, just peel the onion and brainstorm, just use divergent thinking and think of what are all the different benefits, what are all the different things we could do to help people in the realm of preparing their taxes and doing their taxes, right? And we might come up with things like, well, it's a computer, so unlike pen and paper, it can check your taxes. It can make sure you don't make a math mistake. It can file your taxes, like somebody said. Instead of going to print them out and stand in line at the post office, you can just push a button and file them online. It can help you maximize your deductions. It can ask you some questions. Did you do X, Y, and Z? And say, did you know you could write that off? It can analyze your return and say, hey, this looks a little risky. You might want to change this, right? And that's what you want to do. This is just 4 examples. You want to brainstorm as many of those as you can in the early part of your product cycle, basically. And if you notice, good problem space statements are written a certain way. There's a certain pattern here, right? They all start with an active action verb because it's doing something for the user. It's creating value for the user. Check, file, maximize, reduce. The other thing is it's written from the user's perspective. It's not written from the company's perspective, the features team's perspective, the technology's perspective. Like my taxes, my deductions, my auto risk. So that's generally a sign of a customer-centric articulation of basically a product definition. And again, what you want to do is peel the onion. And it's messy, as we just saw, right? You saw my little research that I did here real quick, right? But what happens, one thing you find, even though it's messy, is you will find clusters of related benefits. Like say these 3 benefits, prepare my taxes, reduce my auto risk, check my return. Say I did 5 whys with you guys. So, and I said, why is it important to you to help you prepare your taxes? We would eventually probably get a common answer. And what you're doing is you're kind of making people get more and more high level. So we call it a benefits ladder, actually, if you can visualize it like a ladder. And it would eventually ladder up to an overall benefit of empowerment or confidence. And the story might go something like this. Well, before TurboTax, I didn't know the tax code. I'm not good at math. I was sure I was messing this up. I had no idea what I was doing. And then I have TurboTax, and it just asks me a bunch of questions and holds my hand and guides me through, and I just finish it. Like that might be how they would say that, right? There might be a completely different benefit ladder around saving time. Someone mentioned save time over here, right? Like if you took a stopwatch the old way and you took a stopwatch the new way with TurboTax, how much you could quantify the time savings preparing and filing. And there could be a whole separate benefit ladder related to save money as far as saving, right? And these are very distinct benefits. So what you want to do is, it's going to be messy, but form some organization. And this is basically your problem space definition before you go in and jump into solution space. You notice this whole time I've spent a lot of time talking about what can TurboTax do for customers without actually mentioning a feature. Right? I've been in the problem space. It just so happens that TurboTax does have a feature decked against each one of these benefits. And when you have a clear mapping between a solution and a problem, and you do a good job naming your feature, the upshot is customers can usually tell what value is going to be in it for them just from the name of the feature, right? So now if you follow my advice and you brainstorm and you create these maps with like dozens of potential benefits, the next question comes up is, okay, we can't possibly do all these, so how do we decide which ones to do? So we need to prioritize the benefits. And we want to prioritize based on how much customer value they're creating and how underserved the needs are. And the framework that I created when I was at Intuit to do that is importance versus satisfaction. Let me explain what this is basically. So importance is for that given user need, saving time, saving money, empowerment. How important is that to you? Right? If I just took three needs, the need to share photos with your friends, the need to use, to navigate from point A to point B when you're walking, and the need to catch Pokemon, you guys would all have different answers for those on a scale of 1 to 10, right? That's what I'm talking about. So you can envision this two ways. How important is user need as a formal survey where we ask people to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 and we get thousands of people and we can get quantitative on it, or just as a qualitative thinking tool that your team uses, low, medium, high. You can use it either way. On the x-axis, we have how satisfied are people with the current alternatives. This is in the solution space. This is in the problem space. Okay, so the way you're doing your taxes today, pen and paper, or an accountant, or a tax cut, how satisfied are you with those? And again, you can think about it quantitatively, or just more as a thinking tool. To talk about this, let's break it up into 4 quadrants. So down here in the bottom left, we have a low importance user need and a low satisfaction with current alternatives. In the bottom right, we have low importance of user need, but high satisfaction. At the end of the day, neither of these are worth going after, right? Because you're basically going after a low importance need. And why should you spend your precious time and resources and energy on that? And most people don't do this on purpose. They don't realize till after they launch, because they're not using these techniques, they don't realize till after they launch the thing that they thought was important, customers didn't agree was important, basically, right? In the upper right, we have high importance of user needs, so that's better. But we also have high satisfaction. So it's an important need, but people are pretty happy with what's there. That's a competitive market, basically. And I'm not saying you can't go into a competitive market, but you should just be aware that you're going into a competitive market. And you hear people say you need to be 10x better. This is where you need to be 10x better. You can't just be like 3% better, 5% better. The first thing that comes to mind for me is Google search. It's not like people walk around going, gosh, I can't find anything on this Google thing. It's to type stuff in and nothing. You type something in, you pretty much, you may have to tinker with it a little bit, but you'll find what you need. That's a competitive market. And there actually was a startup that tried to take on Google called Cool that I talk about in the book. It's an interesting case study. All right. In the upper left quadrant, we have high importance of user needs, so that's good. We also have low satisfaction with current alternatives. That's where there's opportunity. All right, so this is what underserved, this is basically the underserved quadrant. And these opportunities don't last forever because we live in a competitive society, environment, and people are innovating and seeing opportunities and going after them all the time. But they do exist. And that's basically what you want to try to identify for your target segment. What are those high importance, low satisfaction needs? The product that I like to highlight here is Uber. Now, Uber's done a lot of things right to be so successful. All right, they've done a great job marketing, they've done a great job building their app and operations and recruiting drivers and everything. But I think one of the unspoken reasons why they're so successful is they're fundamentally, we're addressing an upper left quadrant need. Especially here in the Bay Area. Like if I asked you guys, hey, how important is it to get your flight at SFO on time? Pretty important. How important is it to get to that job interview you need to get to on time? Pretty important. To get to that date, right? So getting to where you need to be on time, reliably, is very important. And we're all in SF. So did any of you guys used to take taxis before Uber? Remember what that was like? So imagine if we talked to 50 people who took taxis, and we said, hey, overall, what was your level of satisfaction with the experience? And then we could break it down. How satisfied were you with the punctuality of the driver arriving? How satisfied were you with the cleanliness of the cab? How safe did you feel during the ride? How easy was it to pay the person? How polite was the person, right? Not every cab ride is going to be bad, but you can imagine a lot of dissatisfied people, right? Okay. Now, if this seems kind of conceptual or theoretical, let me show you some real data. So I was working on a product that had 13 key features, or benefits, basically, and we asked people to rate them. And this is more the quantitative use case where we had thousands of people, so we had a big sample size. And now we've got numbers, right, for importance and satisfaction. And each of these points is one of those 13 key features plotted where it falls with the satisfaction number next to it, right? Now the first thing I noticed was this point up here. Customers are telling us it's 100% importance and we're achieving 98% satisfaction. I was surprised that it was that good, but I was really excited. My second thought was, great, let's not spend any dev resources on that. That's good. Let's go find other things where we can add value. And we've got a cloud, a cluster of things here. We've got this one way down here. But this one actually represents the biggest opportunity to create value because it's relatively high importance and it's pretty low satisfaction. So we went after that one. I was pleasantly surprised a few years after I left Intuit. Has anybody read the book, What Customers Want by Tony Olwick? It's a great book. I was pleasantly surprised that he had his own quantitative importance and satisfaction framework that he had come up with independently. So I was like, okay, there's someone else thinking along this line. So if this idea of thinking about this rigorously and quantitatively appeals to you, I would definitely recommend checking out his book. All right, so the next step, once we've gotten clear, run all those customer needs through that opportunity filter to figure out which ones are underserved, is to get clear on our value proposition. That helps us select which ones we're going to probably address, but now we need to figure out how we're going to be better or different. And before I came out to Silicon Valley, I actually got a master's in industrial engineering where I studied lean manufacturing. And that's where I learned about the Kano model. Has anyone here heard of the Kano model before? Are you familiar with this? So you're hearing more and more applied to product management, which is great. So this model also talks about satisfaction, from a user being completely dissatisfied with the feature or product all the way to being completely satisfied. And then on this axis, it's trying to basically represent how fully does the product meet the need, from it doesn't meet it at all to it fully meets it. And if this seems a little complicated, don't worry. Kano breaks it down into one of 3 categories. There's only 3 categories of features or benefits. The first is performance. This is pretty straightforward. More is better. More creates more customer value. Less creates less customer value. If we were, say, in the microprocessor business and our chip was like 20% faster than the other person's chip, that would be a performance benefit, right? Say we were shopping for cars, and there were 2 cars, and they were pretty much comparable. But then we realized, hey, they're pretty much identical, but this car has twice the miles per gallon as the other car. We would pick that car, all other things being equal, because fuel economy is a performance feature for cars, right? The second category is must-have. So having a must-have doesn't actually make anybody happy, but not having the must-have makes them dissatisfied, right? So if we stick with cars, say you walk into a showroom and you look at the car and you're like, wow, I really like the way that car looks. And you looked at the spec sheet, a sticker on the window, and you like the specs. Then all of a sudden you peeked inside and you realize, oh, this car doesn't have any seatbelts. You wouldn't buy the car because you'd be afraid of dying or getting hurt, right? So seatbelts are a must-have for a car. But if car A has 5 seatbelts and car B has 100 seatbelts, you wouldn't say car B is 20 times better than car A, right? Once you have 1 seatbelt per person, you're good to go. You're checked off the list. The third category is delighters. So not having a delighter doesn't cause a problem because people don't expect it to be there, but having one can create a lot of positive customer satisfaction and value. Not today, but when the first cars came out with GPS navigation, it was a delighter. Before that, back then, people were printing out Google Maps or getting lost or asking for directions. And then the first cars came out with GPS, they just put in their address, and it fundamentally changed how they got from point A to point B. As we all know, though, more and more cars got GPS navigation. TomTom and Garmin came out with their add-ons, and now we all just use our phones to get around, right? And that illustrates that this is not a static picture. The needs and features migrate over time, so that yesterday's delighters become today's performance features, become tomorrow's must-haves, and the pace with which that happens depends on basically like the level of competition and innovation in your space. So what we want to do is put the Kano model to work to get clear on our value proposition, which again is which benefits out of all the ones our product could be delivering, which ones are we going to actually try to deliver, and how are we going to be better than the competition. And the way we put the Kano model to use here is basically a table. And I've kept it generic so you can envision what it might be for your product category, where basically you want to list 1 per row. What are the must-have benefits for my product category? What are the performance benefits for my category? And what are the delighters? And then what you want to do is list a column for each of your competitors and 1 for yourself. Now you don't want to have, I've seen some teams do this, like 20 columns of competitors. You want to get it down to a manageable number of representative competitors. And then what you want to do is score your competitors. And you can get rigorous and quantitative if you have numerical data. Otherwise, you can just use high, medium, low. That's fine too. So like say these are our 2 competitors. We're planning to launch a new product. They both have the must-haves. Competitor A is the best at performance benefit 1. Competitor B is the best at performance benefit 2. They're both so-so at performance benefit 3. Competitor A has a delighter. And that's the competitive backdrop. This is the backdrop upon which we should be figuring out what our value prop is. This is basically the essence of product strategy. And I would honestly say less than 10% of product teams ever go through an exercise like this, right? And we hear plenty of examples, especially in the Valley, of some eager-eyed entrepreneur goes into a VC's office and is like, I've got this great idea for a photo sharing app. And the guy's like, hold on a sec. Have you seen this before? Now, I'm not saying you can't do something just because somebody else has already done it, but you have a really good answer for why you're going to be better or different, right? And one of my favorite definitions of strategy is it means saying no. You have to say no to something, right? We can't possibly try to be the best at everything. We don't have the resources, and it's very defocusing, and it doesn't give you clear positioning. And in contrast, we probably all have been at a company or know someone who works at a company where the sales team goes out and calls on prospective customers, and the customer says, hey, is your product going to have feature A? Oh, yeah, it's going to have feature A. Just sign the contract. We're good. We'll build A. Hey, is it going to have feature B? Oh, yeah, it's going to have feature A. They say yes to everything. Their job is to sell their product. They don't say no. If that's driving your product strategy, you can imagine the directions your product's going to get pulled in. It's not going to be strategic. Strategic decision means that it's irreversible. It's not easily reversed, right? If you can just change your mind the next day, it wasn't strategic. And I have a lot of Steve Jobs quotes in my book. One of my favorite is when he's talking about how they make product decisions at Apple. He says for every yes, when they decide to finally, like this is how the product's going to be, there have been 1,000 no's before that. So those are just some strategic thoughts. So we want to use this backdrop, and this might be what we do. Of course, we're going to have the must-have benefit. We're going to do, we're going to focus on this performance benefit 1 a bit. We're not going to worry about performance benefit 2, and we're going to try to be the best at performance benefit 3. Maybe we've identified a market segment that really values that benefit. Maybe we have some technological ideas as to how we can be more innovative and deliver higher levels of satisfaction against that benefit. And we have our own idea for a unique delighter. At the end of the day, what matters the most on this grid is what we call your unique differentiators. And those are the performance benefits where you're going to be the best and whatever your unique delighters are. And the next step in the process is to get into your MVP. And one of the mistakes I see people make is they don't put anything on these two in their MVP. So what are you really testing when you test an MVP that doesn't have those in there? You're testing like the must-haves. Like it's not really a good test. So that's what we want to focus on. And again, this whole time we've been in the problem space. This is still in the problem space. We're not talking about features yet. Now is when we get to transition to solution space, specify your feature set. I don't have time to go into these three, but basically, again, you want to figure out what's that minimum set of functionality that we can use to test that value proposition to confirm we're going in the right direction before we invest too much down that path, right? Again, you want to create your MVP prototype so that you can work through the design and also test it. UX design is so important. I have a whole chapter in the book just on UX design because I think it's that important, especially for product managers, to at least know about it, and you're going to be able to work more effectively with designers. And like I talk about in my other talks, there are often design gaps. Even in established companies, your team may not have a designer, so good PMs fill the void, as you guys know. And then finally, we're going to get out of the building, take our prototypes, and go test with customers and learn. Now, what I like to close out with is a case study of this applied end-to-end that people found really helpful to kind of see it all come together. And it was for a project that I did called marketingreport.com. Basically, a CEO of a startup that had an existing business had an idea for a new product. And the team was very small. It was me, him, his VP of marketing, and a designer. And the goal was to see if there was a business opportunity. And he had very limited dev resources, so he himself said, you can't actually code anything. And I was like, this is awesome. We're going to use clickable prototypes and validate this before we spend any dev resources. Now, the idea was a marketing report. Does anyone here receive junk mail? Or is euphemism direct mail? Like, so we're going to be calling it direct mail. It's a nicer way of saying junk mail. Of course, everybody does, right? So the idea is like, say I come home from work and I get a junk mail piece that is trying to sell me cat litter. Why did I get that? I got that because in some marketing database in the cloud somewhere, it thinks Dan Olson has a cat, right? That's basically why I got that mail and why you guys get the mail that you get, right? And it was analogous. The best way to explain it is probably with a credit report. If you think about it, not today, but before we had as much transparency in the credit market, you would apply for a credit card or loan, it'd go into a black box, you'd get an answer back yes or no, you have no idea why. Well, why would those decisions get made? Now we know, because of credit reports and credit scores, that it's because, oh, they're keeping track of did you pay your rent on time and your bills, and if you didn't, then you don't get it back, right? So that was the idea, is to get the same kind of transparency that the credit industry has done into the marketing mail industry and to empower customers. That was the idea. So I said, that sounds great. Let's map out our problem space. And basically, the main problem, the main customer benefit that they want to deliver was learn why I received the junk mail I received. Like, why am I getting this junk mail that I received, right? And that was the problem space. And the key solution space ideas were a marketing report, which was like a credit report, a marketing score, which is like a credit score, and a marketing profile that basically had like the details of what they thought your interests were and what you would be into, basically. And that was the core idea. One of the execs also wanted to test out some related ideas about money-saving offers. Like, hey, maybe I don't have a cat, but I have a dog. I'd be happy to raise my hand and opt in for dog food coupons to save money. That was that idea. He thought maybe he had a hypothesis, maybe people would want to compare their spending habits and patterns with other people. And then because social networking was hot at the time, social networking. So there too. Pretty much like solution space, not getting clear on what the benefit was. The other executive wasn't interested in any of the blue. He was mainly interested in the green, but he had other ideas as well. It's like, hey, what if we just try to just reduce the junk mail overall that people get? Like what if that's the gist of what we try? And then we brainstorm, hey, if we're reducing all this mail, then we can claim some kind of green save trees benefit that people might feel good about. So I iterated with them to this point, and I said, okay, is everyone's idea on the board? And they said yes. And I looked at it, and I was like, this is way too big for one product concept or MVP. So what we did is we took the core green idea plus the yellow and called that the marketing shield concept because it was trying to shield you from junk mail, basically. And then we took the core green because that was the main idea and combined it with the blue money-saving stuff and called that the marketing saver. So we actually created 2 sets of prototypes and ran it through the lean product process that we did. This is an example of what we did. You know, in my book, I talk about different levels of fidelity and interactivity of artifacts. This is maybe medium fidelity. We didn't kill ourselves on making some pixel-perfect design, just enough to convey and look, professional enough. And then when you clicked in, this is marketingreport.com, the landing page, when you clicked in, we had these modules, and that's how we mixed and matched the features of the 2 concepts with these little modules. And when you clicked on one of these modules, it would go to a whole page that talked all about that feature and had the UI and controls for that feature, basically. So it was about a site of about 9 pages. And I basically moderated users through the tests. And what did we learn? Here's that same map, now color-coded. The bottom line is people had tons of questions and concerns on both concepts, right? And basically these are color-coded so that green meant that even though there were questions and concerns, we felt like a good handle on them and then we could iterate and address them and there might be a real opportunity to create customer value there if we could address it, if we could address those issues. Yellow meant they weren't that interested. Red meant they didn't really want anything to do with it. They didn't understand it. They didn't like it, right? So the first thing when you run this kind of test is you hope to have some green. There's no guarantee you're going to get green, especially the first time you run it. So we had green. Was there any green in the core idea? No green in the core idea. So it's like, thank God we tested something else. And you hear about all these startups. Like Slack didn't start out to be a messaging tool, right? Flickr didn't start out to be a photo tool. It's like, you get out there and you're talking to customers. You have all these hypotheses, and they're like, hey, how important is this problem to you? Well, it's kind of annoying. But let me tell you what really bothers me. And you just learn about the adjacent need, right? So that's what we learned. So we basically had green here on these 2, reduce junk mail and save trees, and we had green on money-saving offers, right? The other thing that I was just as happy about was finding red. Red means waste. Red means like not creating customer value. There was this guy. Do you guys know what a marketing score is? I don't know what a marketing score is, but I know it would have taken a lot of engineering effort. We didn't have the data to generate it. It would have taken expensive third-party data APIs and a lot of time and effort and servers and things like that. But because nobody wants it, we don't have to expend those resources, basically, right? And you hear people say, we need to pivot. Well, we started here, and we had to decide, are we going to pivot to that idea? We're going to pivot to that idea. Which green island are we going to pivot to? And we decided to pivot to reduce junk mail for a few reasons. One, it was more consistent with the company's brand. They already had an existing product and brand. Second, money-saving offers, there were a lot of people already doing that, and it was hard to see how we were going to be better or different back to our value proposition. And thirdly, we knew that to do this, we'd have to sign a lot of partnerships and biz dev deals. It would take a long time. It would move out our time to market window. We didn't want to do that. So we pivoted to reduce junk mail. Because we hadn't coded a single line of code, nobody had any heartburn or heartache about just throwing those prototypes away, those clickable prototypes away, and starting from scratch, right? And so we took all of our notes from these concepts, from the marketing shield concept. I had like 6 pages of single-space notes of all the things that people had questions about, concerns about, didn't understand, suggestions, and we just dutifully started from scratch with the new prototype and went through and made sure it addressed all those. So we pivoted completely. Marketingreport.com was gone. We pivoted to junk mail freeze. Again, a prototype, clickable prototype, no code. But now, it's funny. Remember how I said you got to peel the onion? He said reduce junk mail. That's pretty high level in hindsight. That's like saying prepare my taxes, right? When I talked to 20 customers in these interviews, I learned, hey, not all junk mail is created equal. There are some types of junk mail. Think about the junk mail you get. Are there certain types that really annoy you or really bother you more than others? What we found is there are, and there's financial related ones. It's pre-approved checks, pre-approved credit card offers, and cash advance checks. And we found out why. A lot of these people live in houses where their mailbox is not locked, and anybody can reach in there and grab this stuff and try to create a credit card under their name or write a cash advance check. So they really didn't like that, and so we put that front and center. And the coolest thing, the second time we ran another set of tests, I could see people reading that, and they're like their pulse would get a little fast, like they hated it so much. They were like, yeah, I hate those things, yeah. They were like really into it. They're kind of nodding and stuff. Other things I learned, this is what happens when you get out of the building and talk to customers. Did we have any save time benefit? We didn't have any save time benefit. But what I learned is, I don't do this, but I learned that in the saver segment, there are a lot of people that they say, hey, Dan, let me tell you what I do. Every day I come home from work, I go to the mailbox, I grab the stack of mail, and I go straight to my shredder, and I go shred, 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 shred for 5 minutes. 6 days a week, that's 30 minutes a week. 50 weeks a year, that's 1,500 minutes a year they're shredding. So we totally said, hey, spend less time shredding. Oh, I had a whole new benefit we didn't even know about, right? And things that might seem silly. People said, oh, you're going to save trees? How many trees are you going to save? So we put in 43 trees. So they knew exactly how many trees we were going to save. And I didn't mention, both times I asked, hey, would you pay $10 a month for this concept? And it's always a little iffy to ask people if they would hypothetically pay, if they don't have to bust out their wallet. But the first time around, no one was having anything to do with it. The second time around, what they said is, well, I need a 30-day trial. But if your product did what it says, I would gladly pay you $10 a month. And it was pretty much very big night and day difference. And then the other cool thing, kind of the non-test evidence, I was like, thank you so much, Barry, for coming in. Here's your check for your time that you spent with us. Almost every single person was, after we gave them their check and the test was done, before they left the room, they were like, so is this project live now? Can I go use this service now? I'm like, no, sorry, we're still building it. It's not live yet. They're like, can I give you my email? Can you please email me when this launches? Like, nobody had done that the first time, so I was pretty psyched about the progress that we made in that first one. So, so that's the lean product process. Again, I'll give out the book. I mentioned, actually, so Tony is kind of my hero, Tony Ulwick, the guy that had that What Customers Want book. I actually got him, he's going to come speak. I run a meetup down in Palo Alto. He's coming, so if you're really excited about that. He actually, so Clayton Christensen, gets a lot of credit for Jobs to be Done. Tony was also a pioneer in Jobs to be Done. And so his book just came out, Jobs to be Done. He's going to be sharing advice and talking about that there, basically. Also, I run workshops every once in a while. My next one I have coming up is May 25th in Palo Alto. I have a 10% code if anybody's interested. I'm happy to talk to you about it. But basically, it's an all-day event where we walk through the whole book and have a lot of group exercises. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we'll figure out who got the book. Thanks.